Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pickleball Noise Relief. This is a kind of a continuing series of Zoom calls with experts and neighbors who are involved in some disputes and conflicts over the noise generated from the sport of pickleball. And today we have a very special event, which is the release of our project called the Model Pickleball Noise Ordinance, written by our advisor, Les Blumberg. And Les, if I can go ahead and introduce you right now and say hello. And he's the executive director of the Noise Pollution Clearinghouse, and we're just thrilled to have him here.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here.
And we started the ordinance because a lot of our neighbors have been working with city councils and land planners trying to appeal to their good senses in terms of this noise that's being generated right across from my street or right behind my backyard is driving me bonkers. And it didn't start overnight. It's just been creeping up on me. And now I have a full-blown distress disorder of some kind. We don't actually have a medical name for it yet, but we may someday as we study this. Rob, you've been out there visiting neighbors and measuring some of the sounds that they're experiencing. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what you've been hearing out there?
I love visiting people, and I love hearing their stories. And unfortunately, it's very similar across all different types of people. I mean, we have a huge variety of folks that are living close to courts. And, my daughter moved, we moved from our house because of the pickleball noise. And then she moved to Aventura, Florida, and, for work. And pickleball courts showed up within 200 feet of her condominium. Fortunately, she's a renter. And so she moved again. And the punchline is that when she moved into her next apartment in Hollywood, a little bit north, she received pickleball paddles as a gift, a welcome gift from the condominium complex.
This poor girl. That's so amazing. She's probably the first story we've heard so far who's had to move twice.
Right.
So just to follow on that idea of the moving, for the last 100 years, the main form of noise control in our country, except for a brief window in the 1970s when we tried to use policy and technology to address noise problems, has been to move. And it's kind of unfortunate that that's the case, because in general, what that has caused is an incredible environmental justice problem. Because most of the noise sources that people have been moving from in the past have been airports and highways. And so who moves in but people who have lower incomes and people of color. And that is, been the story of noise control in the United States, unfortunately, and remains that way. And, and I see this ordinance as like one step in the way of trying to get in the path of trying to get policy and technology again to be noise control methods as opposed to moving.
Well, that brings me to a question. In those cases, though, don't the cities declare eminent domain and don't they help people move? Or what percentage of people are left on their own to deal with this?
Everybody. I mean, you go around any major airport that's been there and been big for like 40 years. Well,
I mean, when they're building the airport.
Well, most of these airports, I mean, with a few exceptions like Denver, where they built a new one, are existing airports that have just kept growing and growing, and they just keep adding a runway. And all of a sudden that exposes a new population to noise. But, occasionally airports will buy out some homes, but those are only, those are only the absolute worst affected. And the noise levels in the buyout zones are just truly horrendous.
Yeah. once the airport is in, and if somebody moves in, they're doing it knowingly. But then what you said is that some of these airports expand.
Sure, they
And
expand.
at one point, a neighborhood that didn't hear the noise, now they hear the noise. And you're saying sometimes in rare occasions, the
But
city will compensate those
I would
people?
say never frame it that way. Never frame a noise issue that way. For example, we used to think that living in a house with a smoker was just kind of inconvenient. And we have since learned that living in a house with a smoker is actually dangerous to your health. And, never frame it as a noise issue as people move to it. It's like we've got new data that's recent that shows health impacts. And that was not there before. And the other thing is the people that often end up moving towards these major noise problems, like airports and highways, almost always are people with lower incomes. And so I would never, ever, ever frame a noise issue that way.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. I think with the connection I'm trying to make is it's a lot of our pickleball neighbors, the players, and the players are the ones who are making the noise. Let's never forget that, right? The court's not making the noise. The players are. And the neighbors are being told, well, you live next to a park. You should have expected noise. And that's where our noise ordinance comes into play right now. Maybe we could segue into that.
Sure.
Tell us how that can protect neighbors if we can talk cities and HOAs
Sure.
into being more cognizant of all that.
Yeah, well, why don't you throw up the noise ordinance and let me tell you what I'm kind of planning to do here. First, I was going to talk a little bit about its intended use. Second, where did this come from? Third, what's in it? I was going to go through it with you all. And fourth, how to get it adopted.
Okay,
and so to start with the intended use, I think that's the easiest and simplest thing. It's for noise ordinances, zoning regulations, and parts of it can be adopted for homeowners associations and condominium associations and the such. So that one's done. That one's easy. So let's go with where did it come from? And the answer to that, and if you scroll down to the very bottom of this document, at the very end, you will see, when you look at this and when you have more time to look at this, you will see where it comes from. It's that roll to. That's actually just a part of a roll of microfilm that I got from the EPA of all their documents. And this is it. It's their model community noise ordinance. And this is the source of most of the model noise ordinance. I think it's important to know that, and you should, if you're planning on trying to get the model noise ordinance adopted, I would print out a copy of this too and have it with you and read it and be familiar with it, because it is the kind of the foundation of the ordinance that I've prepared. And if you scroll real quick to page 36, which is of the ordinance, which was page 40 something of the PDF, right there, this is the section you're going to see again. Section 8.1, that table 1, section 8.2, that's the section, that's the part you're going to see again. And this is the meat of the noise ordinance right here. It's really straight out of the model noise ordinance. So that the EPA created. So let's go back to our ordinance. Well, why don't we just use the model EPA ordinance? Because this was written in 1974. It's a little out of date. It's not problematic, but in the sense that there really isn't anything wrong with the ordinance except for noise has the nature of noise in the United States has changed in the last 50 years. We've invented a lot of new sources like pickleball that didn't exist back then. Like, I mean, you just go through the list. I mean, boom boxes didn't exist in 1974. You know, I mean, you think about all of the inventions that make noise that never existed back in the 70s. You know, ATVs were barely around. So, you know, there's lots of new noise sources. So it needs updating, but it's a good basis for starting with. And so that brings me to number 3, what's in the noise ordinance? And what we want to do is start with just part 1. But first of all, there's an introduction. If you scroll up just a little bit in the introduction there, it's got this one quote I love, which is bolded there. And I think I use this anytime I talk to people about noise and zoning and planning. You know, anytime you cite a noisy source like a pickleball court or any other noise generating source, whether it's commercial or whatever, industrial, without proper planning, you're basically, if you don't have a good planning process in your city, you are planning on creating noise problems. And I think that is just so true. It's just like a lot of people figure, oh, if there's a noise problem, we'll solve it if it shows up. And that is the wrong time to solve it. It's noise problems can often be easily solved with policy and technology. However, if once you create a noise problem, it is often incredibly expensive to solve it. And so it's really best to solve a noise problem ahead of time. Okay, so you know, basically the introduction just describes what's in the paper. If we can skip down to part 1 now. I've got a bunch of parts in here. This one is, part 1 is, what is my regulatory philosophy? My regulatory philosophy is to utilize as many regulatory tools as possible, and I list them there. The decibel level, the setbacks from residential uses, time of day restrictions, day of week restrictions, plainly audible restrictions, prohibitions in residential zones. Those are, you know, like everybody, when they think of a noise ordinance, they think of decibel levels. That is, you know, even in the 500 largest cities in the United States, only slightly more than half have decibel limits in them. That is just not how we, and the number that actually enforce decibel limits in this country is vastly smaller than that. It's really rare. So it's really important that you have decibel limits, because engineers who are designing a facility need a level that they're going to design to. But you can't depend on your community to have police officers that are trained in the use of the sound level meter, that have a meter that is properly maintained, calibrated, and such. And so you really need these other tools also. So try to use all of them. Part 2. This is just me telling you what's in a noise ordinance. And, you know, noise ordinances, there are other, you know, sections. They might not lay it out this way, but almost every noise ordinance has this kind of layout in it. And we are going to be dealing with number 2, 3, and 4, the definitions, the general prohibitions, which kind of are the usually often 2 things: one, a nuisance standard that covers everything, and a decibel standard that kind of covers everything, and then specific prohibitions. And that's where all those other regulatory tools get thrown into the specific prohibitions section. And so what happens is when a cop goes out to a noise complaint, 95% of the time it is dealt with using a general prohibition, which is something close to a nuisance standard. And you'll see one coming up shortly, which is the one the EPA proposed back in 74. And, you know, that is what they use 95% of the time in noise enforcement. almost never does a noise meter come out in noise enforcement. It's almost always just using that nuisance or using a specific prohibition. Okay, those are the two things that police officers rely on. So those are the sections we're going to deal with. If you scroll, to part 3. Yes, there we go. So part 3 is kind of the meat of the noise ordinance. And, this is where we start off with the first thing. Provision 1 is that nuisance standard I told you about. It's a noise that annoys or disturbs a person of a reasonable person of normal sensitivities. This is in probably 95% of all noise ordinances in the United States. It is, or some version of this, maybe this or disturbing the peace or something else like that, or is used in most noise ordinances. And it is the most common one that's used by police officers. My experience, however, is that cops do not enforce this against commercial entities, municipal entities. You just never see a police officer using this to enforce it against a business, for example. And so for that reason, or a municipality itself, and so for that reason, you need the second standard, which is the permissible noise limits. And so if you just scroll down a little bit, you can see where table 1 here is where they are. The main things I want you to focus on is the 55 and 50, the daytime and nighttime residential and public space noise limits. And I want to flip back to to show you where I got those. I want to flip back to but I want you to go to page 9, which is like page 19, I think it is, of the PDF. Right there, figure 1. Back in the 1970s, the EPA surveyed noise ordinances, and they show the results here. The vertical axis is the number of cities with a noise level of a specific noise level. The horizontal axis is the decibel level of the cities. You'll see in the bottom left-hand corner, that's 90 decibels. On the bottom right-hand corner, that's 40 decibels. And basically, you can count like the blue or the black circles are the daytime limits. The squares are the nighttime limits. So you can see the highest number of noise limits of cities with a specific decibel limit is the black dot at the intersection of 55 decibels and approximately 36 communities. They had surveyed a little over 100 communities, 117, 118 communities. Yeah, right there, that one there. And so and this is for residential noise. This is for an urban residential receiver. Remember when the EPA did this work? Sound level meters in the 70s weren't nearly as ubiquitous as they are now, or common. They're not ubiquitous, but they're more common at least. And so the communities at that time, when the EPA wrote this noise ordinance, they said that they were writing it for communities of greater than 100,000 people, because I don't think they were thinking that communities of less than that were going to be into sound level meters. And so we're talking urban residential areas. And 55 is the most common level for an urban residential area. When I write noise ordinances, I always start with that level. And then I adjust it left or right, higher or lower, depending on the community. But I the 55 is the mean, the median, and the mode in the EPA data. And so it's like a perfect place to start. I've since replicated this study myself and found pretty close results, a little slightly higher levels now, partly because I think, we've had 50 years of erosion of noise control. And so I think the levels have crept up some. But, this, I think, is the place to start. If you're a suburban community or a rural community, you should be shifting it to the right. If you're in, a really noisy urban community, maybe shift it a little to the left. Personally, I think 65 decibels, anything like all those communities with levels above 65, down in the bottom left-hand corner, all of those down there, those are ordinances that are written to protect the noise polluter and not the noise polluted. A noise level of 80 decibels at a property line is just absolutely outrageous. The only reason for that standard is to protect a noise polluter, not to protect the health and well-being of people. 65 for a residential area is getting up there, and I think is only acceptable if you have like something like a 50 at the nighttime. Otherwise, I think even 65 is just not. You're not protecting the health and well-being of your community at those levels.
Quick question right now is, since these were from 1975 and they weren't testing suburban communities, which is really what most pickleball noise sites are located in, suburban communities. Mine is 20,000 residents. When do we expect an update? How do we, when?
Oh, never. Now this is. Unless
steering this ship?
Yeah, there's an organization called Quiet Communities that is seeking to force the EPA to basically reopen. It was the EPA Office of Noise Abatement and Control was closed by Ronald Reagan back in 1981. But the funding has to come from Congress.
Right.
Exactly. And so it's not the president. It has to come from the Congress.
Got it. We'll be working on that.
Yeah.
So let's get back to. Do you want to go to table one?
Well,
you were explaining how this comes from the EPA.
So that's
model.
where that comes from. The commercial and industrial levels, basically, the EPA. If you found that one table with all the circles and squares in it, after that you don't have to go there. After that, there was a table for commercial and industrial. Basically, the EPA found like roughly a 5 decibel increase as you moved up the zones. And so that's what I've done, is I've escalated the zones. And these are for receivers. So it's not who's generating the noise, it's who's receiving the noise that these are based on. Let me tell you what's not in the EPA document, and that's the right-hand column, the DBC levels. Okay? That's new. That's new because low-frequency noise has been a growing issue. This is not an issue that is pertinent to pickleball. So if the DBC levels are going to be a hindrance to you guys in getting this adopted, you should just delete that line or that column, because that really applies to low-frequency noise. But I think it's important that communities communities are starting to adopt DBC levels. And so I think a model noise ordinance should have a DBC level as well as a DBA level. You should not have just one or the other. You should have both. Number 3, the correction factor, that too is straight out of the model noise ordinance. Although the model noise ordinance did not specify a level, I put in a 5 decibel level there for correction. And that correction factor is for 2 things: pure tones and impulsive noise. And pickleball noise clearly qualifies as impulsive noise. So, that would be subject to that additional 5 decibel penalty. So that changes your 55-50 down to a 50-45 at nighttime levels. For residential receivers. And then the final thing, number 4 there, that is also not in the EPA ordinance. So So this whole section here is straight out of the EPA ordinance, except for the column with the FAS, or with the DBC, and number 4 there, the interior sound levels. Again, I think noise ordinances that neglect interior sound levels are incomplete, because a lot of sources are interior in it, like in apartment complexes, and exterior noise levels are not appropriate inside a home. And so I think it's important to have that in. Instead of specifying a level, this utilizes a increase in the background using the C scale. But this would work fine for pickleball too, interior. So that's that section there. The next section is I just explained the rationale for that. The only thing I want to show you on that section is the discussion on fast. Just go up a little bit. Right there. Second paragraph, it says fast or fast response. This is incredibly important. Noise, first of all, in averaging like an LEQ is the death of noise enforcement at the police level. There is just no way I've never found a police department that will ever enforce a average noise level, because they just are not qualified and they cannot do it. And so you don't want to have an LEQ in there at all, and you don't want to have a slow response in there. The other options is fast or slow. Just to go back into the history of things, back in the 30s and 40s, when sound level meters were being standardized, fast was the initial response that was developed. But the problem with fast, they didn't call it fast, but it had an analog meter, and that needle on it would go like this as the noise levels change. And the problem was people couldn't read it. And so they slowed it down. And by doing that, they did it in a couple different ways. But the main thing was that they used a longer time period to basically use a whole second to average noise over. And that just doesn't work. Fast is still not ideal for pickleball, because pickleball, the duration of a pickleball impulse is much less than 1/8 of a second, which is what fast is. And so still not ideal, but it is what is on the sound level meter that police departments can use. And so it is out of the options available, it is what we have, and it is the best out there. Yeah, right. Just think of this as a switch on the sound level meter.
Right, okay.
No, have them jump in.
Oh, okay, Bob, are you ready?
Yeah, Les, a couple of questions. By the way, I completely agree that DBA Fast L Max is a convenient way to do it. Lots of meters are available that can measure that. And if you measure slow, it blends into the background noise. So I agree with you. But let me go back to your table where you subtract 5 decibels for both pure tone and for impulse. Why is that? Why did you pick 5 decibels? Why not 3 or 2 or 9? Where did you get 5?
We have sound noise impact reports that say that 12 decibel is the penalty, based on the ANSI standard or whatever.
The point I was making was you picked 55, you looked at a lot of history. 55 is a very, very common number, but then you suddenly take 5 away from it. So I'm looking for a reason for that.
Reason for that, yes. And well, there isn't as good a reason for that as for others. The EPA left it blank. They assumed something would be taken away, but they did not specify an amount. And I think somebody mentioned in there that there's the ANSI standard with a 12 or 13 decibel impulsive noise. That's true. It tends to be off of averages that's used. And so I think that's for the fast response, I think that's probably a little high. I think using 5 or 10 could be justified. I think I would just call that a professional judgment. And you know, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of funny if you think back to the nighttime penalty that we have, that was developed by the EPA back in the 70s, when they developed what was called the LDN standard. They came up with a 10 decibel nighttime penalty, and you know, they just pulled that out of their butt themselves. You know, there was no data, there was no studies. They just said it sounds about right, and they went with it. and you know, that there should be a penalty for impulsive noise is pretty clear. I mean, the studies show that. The EPA Model Noise Ordinance says that. I don't think that there is the perfect study out there that says this is the level it should be. So I don't think that there is one. I think 5 decibels is kind of like a middle of the road, justifiable, easy to explain level. It's not the 13 and it's not 0. You know, it's kind of somewhere in between there. And I think somewhere in between there is right. And I don't think that, you know, beyond that, we're going to have much more at this time. I don't know of any perfect data to say, oh, this is what it's got to be. But we know it's got to be something. We know impulsive noise is more problematic than a steady state noise. So we know it's got to be something. We've known it's got to be something for at least 50 years because the EPA put it in the Model Noise Ordinance. And, you know, could you justify different levels? Sure. So you know, if you want to do that, go for it. But I'm just picking kind of a conservative, middle of the road number, saying, you know, this is not the highest it could be. This is not the lowest.
And it's your opinion, and you're the author of the report, so that's, everybody needs to take that into account. If your local city council wants to change something, they're going to. You know, someone on the city council might want 10 dB.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you got to get this thing passed, right? and so, I mean, because you have to get that thing passed, that's why I go with, you know, the starting with the EPA Model Noise Ordinance as the basis, and starting with the mean, the mode, and the median levels for urban residential receivers. That's where I start with.
All right. So can I ask a follow-up question? So, okay, I understand.
Well,
that.
actually, Bob, I want to make sure we get through everything. Let's go to the specific prohibitions, because that's going to be a big part of the ordinance as well.
But Bob, hold that thought though.
Yes, please do.
Yeah.
No.
There is an element of pragmatism in this. Will 55 and 50 be protective of 100% of the population? Absolutely not. There will be people who will still be impacted. And so, you know, yeah, I'm not saying that this is okay. I'm saying that this is something that you can probably get past, and it will be very helpful. I think some of these other specific prohibitions get to some of the issues even better, and that would be the setback. And so basically using, you know, kind of the maximum noise level of a pickleball court, you come up with a distance of about 800 feet for that 50 decibel standard during the day. And so basically the best way to enforce that 55 and 50 is with a setback. And feet. And I later on explained that if your ordinance uses a different number, you can have a different setback. But I think that setback is critical, number one, because police officers don't use sound level meters. And so getting the setback into the ordinance, even though it's really just based on the decibel level in the ordinance, is what's critical. The second thing is the plainly audible within a residential dwelling unit. I think this is something that should have appeal to your council members, is that, look, you know, we want people to exercise, we want them to have fun. But when you're within your own home, you know, in your living room, in your bedroom, you should not be listening to other people from outside. And so basically, the plainly audible standard is just one of detectability. Can you hear the sound? If you can hear it, it's in violation. And so if you can get number 2 adopted, you will protect the people for whom the 50 or the 55 does not protect, at least inside their home. And then the number 3 there is just a nighttime level. Again, you know, it has a higher distance because there's a lower nighttime standard. And again, it's just using that same distance. And if you scroll down just a little bit, there's a table. And there you have, you know, using, you know, assumptions for a maximum level of a pickleball impact, the various distances that a different decibel limit would require. So you could, you know, kind of look at your noise ordinance, existing noise ordinance, and really, you know, if your existing noise ordinance says 55 decibels, and maybe it doesn't have a penalty for impulsive noise, but it just says 55 during the day, let's say. Well, you can argue to your city council, well, that's you know, that's an equivalent of a 450-foot setback. Let's just use that. So so that's what that table there is for. Then comes the definitions. Again, you get a bunch of definitions that you need, and to slip into the definitions section of a noise ordinance, and I've written them there. And then finally, the zoning considerations, the last part of this thing. Really, the only zoning consideration, these provisions above can all get adopted in a noise ordinance or a zoning regulation. But the main thing about a zoning regulation is that a zoning regulations have typically what are called conditional and permitted uses. And if a use is a permitted use, it is basically permitted in that zoning district. If it's a conditional use, it's permitted in that zoning district only conditionally, only if it meets a bunch of conditions. Those conditions being all of the things up above. And so what it does is it adds an extra level of review to the permitting, planning and permitting process. And pickleball courts in a residential zone absolutely have to go through that additional level of review. So that would be my only consideration there.
So the model noise ordinance is going to live on your website, noise pollution clearing. If you have a question, you guys just unmute and we'll continue the conversation.
Well, I'll start that. So I'm interested in your chart and your tables and your distances. And in your text, you said something about barriers and that sometimes barriers can't work because people can see over barriers. But will you grant me that if you have substantial barriers, for instance, in single-story homes and flat land, that the distances could be substantially less than 800 feet to achieve 50 dBA?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's just that I see this all the time, you know, and you know, the noise experts are the worst offenders of this. They just say, oh yeah, we're going to put a barrier and address it. And yes, barriers can reduce noise levels.
And the same thing applies to paddles. You know, the owl paddle's about 8 decibel lower. According to numbers, you could drop the distance in half. Now, I recognize that getting everybody to use one particular paddle is no minor problem, but it can happen in many communities.
But you see, this is the incentive, right? I mean, if we start adopting these types of regulations, you know, the industry is going to go, oh, we got to do this. You know, basically, yeah, you could put a barrier in, but if somebody has a second story window, it won't do any good. And yes, you could have quieter paddles, but if the people playing next to you have noisier ones, it won't do any good. It'll still violate that 55, 50, or whatever decibel limit you have at a certain, you know, at some distance. It's going to be in a violation. And so, you know, I am always skeptical of these types of fixes because they're not, they require expertise. A barrier requires some expertise in designing it and implementing it. Rarely does it exist and is employed. And so I don't think as a basis we should be saying this. I mean, if the community and if the developer wants to, you know, truly do good noise control, it is possible to have lower levels or, you know, shorter distances. And but more likely than not, it will just be abused and it will just be a loophole. And so I discount that because the number of times that it will be done right and done well and maintained over the life of the facility is just not that great.
Les, that's exactly what I was going to add, is that if you say we think we can get it down, you know, 10 dB, you'd have to put in the money and build the wall or put in those, you know, sound barriers before you can test out the clearly audible standard. And, you know, the science just hasn't caught up with what people are experiencing. And I have yet to see an example where a barrier was put up and then we asked the neighbors, has it, you know, has the annoyance stopped? We just aren't seeing examples of that.
Yeah, I mean, again, it takes, you know, both ethics and you know, and technological knowledge, acoustic knowledge to design this. And if it's not employed, it's not going to work. And so I don't think you should assume it. If you want to create a way where if they can, you know, if the developer or whatever can prove it, but it's gonna be really difficult because you're gonna have to monitor it. You're gonna have to, you know, have an engineer design it so that it will be effective at those second story windows. You know, there's so many.
Even at the equipment, the quiet equipment level, even if you have 30 players out there and 25 of them have the quiet equipment, you still got those 5 people. So instead of 900 pops,
you don't even need 5. You need 1.
You need 1. Yeah, 1.
You only need 1, and that's the problem. And so until the equipment becomes that way, you can't design the noise ordinance for that because the noise ordinance is written to the maximum level. And that 1 is the maximum. And so, you know, that technological solution cannot be used unless there is and here's the thing. I can't imagine a mechanism that would ensure that everybody at a facility uses a quieter paddle. I just can't imagine, you know, do you have somebody there checking every paddle when they come in? No. You know, it's not going to happen.
Even in an HOA, if they have, you know, the daytime office hours and you can only use the equipment that they check out, you lose control in the evening time, you know?
Yeah. But I mean, it would have to be something like that, right?
Yeah.
The only barrier that I would go with is an enclosure, right? Put it inside. You know, that's fine. You know, that works. You know, it takes care of the second story. Doesn't matter what your technology is, although people are going to You put it inside, and eventually people are going to go, yeah, let's go with those quieter pedals. You know?
Exactly. That's true.
I had a quick question. Is there an absolute minimum setback where you cannot have a pickleball court? I know we call say 800 feet, but can we say you cannot have a pickleball court at 100 feet or 200 feet, regardless of barrier and all those things?
I tend to base my distance off of my noise limit. And just, I think you've got a better scientific justification for the distance based on that. And so, you know, is there a distance I wouldn't want to live? You know, personally, yeah, make it 1,000 for me. Right?
Exactly. That's what I was trying to lead at. Yeah.
But, you know, David Woolworth brings up kind of a point in the comments. He says, keep in mind, if it is too restrictive, it will not, I can't read what it says, but it must be saying it will not pass or something like that. And I kind of see this is where I kind of feel like you have to be somewhat pragmatic, you know, on this, that there's going to be a range that will make it much, much better, right? And I think, you know, starting with the EPA's 55 and 50 is like your go-to, you know, this is not very controversial. It's a well-established limit. It's, you know, it's our basis, and it will solve most of our problems.
I want to go ahead and ask Barry to unmute, and then after him, David.
I am unmuted.
Right.
One of the comments I would have is that we're in this pickle, no pun intended, or dilemma, because most of the noise ordinances that are on the books are inadequate or just deficient in quantifying the annoyance from pickleball. And this is not limited to pickleball. This applies to all the paddle sports as well as basketball. Les, I agree with the work you've done. How would you make that available? Because I would think that communities, homeowners associations would want to have this in their documentation so that then they don't get into all of these fights.
Right.
And how do you make this available or make it
that's your job.
Well,
to me, that's your job. You guys take this document, you find that city council member, you find that condo association member, you know, board member or whatever, and work with them to get this adopted. That, you know, you work with, you know, you guys take this and run with it now and find the people most sympathetic to you that can help you get it adopted, and then take their lead on the political process.
I put this up on the screen because this is Les's website, and our noise ordinance will be living here. And by the way, thank you so much for our 24 members who raised the money and helped finance this project. We really appreciate it. David, and then Amy, and then I guess we'll close it out.
Hey, I just wanted to comment on that part about when I was commenting about less in it, that if it's too restrictive, you may have an issue. And I'll say this, I'm here somewhere. Anyway, the issue here comes down to if you put too much of a penalty onto the impulsive or the tonal part, that may not fly with your people, and on another level, if you lower the levels too much, you're going to find yourself above ambient. Your limit will be below the ambient noise, and now everybody will have issues here. And we did an ordinance for New Orleans, and somebody was getting, they wanted to sue. They were suing 30 bars, and they wanted to change the ordinance level. And so we went out and checked, and it was 5 or 10 decibels below just the sound on the street, with nothing, no cars, no people. And so you're going to have to make sure that it's realistic, whatever you do. And Les, of course, has an infinite amount of experience in this realistic application and what's practical. And so the numbers in this look great for a suburban environment. And yeah, you can tweak them, but it's a great starting point. And I just feel like that's an important thing. And I think Les has thought this through, and the fast waiting can be used by most police units, most police, so that's accessible to people. It's not impulsive noise or some other metric. And then the DBC, if you can use it, great. If you can't, you still have the A-weighted. I think that's part of the thing. And so this is a great start. And it's a great starting point. I mean, yeah, there's no point in, I wouldn't rock the boat too much trying to get it quieter or anything like that, because it's reasonable. Now, you may have a particular circumstance, and I wrote here too that I think what Les wrote, unless you can correct me, it looked like it was sort of a hemispherical over a hard surface when you looked at the propagation. So, yeah. If you start putting in like hills and barriers and other noise sources, and then buildings and things, those numbers change. And sometimes, most of the time, these effects will reduce the sound more over distance. Sometimes in weird situations or different situations, you have sound that gets louder. So you have to sort of split the difference somewhere. And again, this sort of, what's where Les is starting. And, this is great. This is a very reasonable place to start, and people may be able to integrate this straight in. And if you don't get everything you want, you'll get a lot of what you want, is where I would say. So I'll stop. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, David. That's really helpful. Amy?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, I agree. This is fantastic. The village that I'm in is going to be going through a recodification in the next couple years. And I've already pegged the 2 people on my village board that already know where I stand, and I'm going to take this to them. And they just got elected, so they're on for 3 years. So that will help. But my question was about this interior. Les, you had said it shouldn't be heard inside the residence. Is that defined as windows closed or windows open?
It is inside your residence. It is irrespective of the condition of the windows.
Okay, because that came up when we were doing Battle of Ball with the pickleball people. I said, I can hear you in my office, and they're like, well, close your windows. I'm like, no.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I again, the way it's defined, it's just inside your residence.
Okay.
It doesn't specify that the windows have to be opened or closed.
Okay.
And I think you're best just to leave it that way.
Yes.
Don't specify it that way.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it's just like, this is my home, right? If I want to get a little fresh air in my home, I should be entitled to it.
Yeah. I would even like to go a step farther and say I shouldn't hear it on my patio.
Well,
but,
yes. I mean, this was a quick question we've raised. A number of people have raised is like, is this the conditions under which I would personally want to live? No.
Right.
I would want it something more restrictive. Is this conditions under which I could deal with? Probably. But definitely, get yourself some restrictions on the weekends and on the evenings and afternoons when you are.
If you were less than 1,200 feet, you don't go later than 7 p.m. You don't go earlier than 9 a.m.
No, that's for the basically the weekdays, and then on Sunday and federal holidays, it's more restricted, noon to 5.
Gotcha, noon to 5. That's a big difference from what most pickleball courts are right now. A lot of them are there from 8 in the morning or 7:30 in the morning till 9, 10 o'clock at night. And you're just specifying that that's way too much.
Yeah. And
Exposure.
again, this is something that any police officer can enforce. They don't have to go back to the station and find a sound level meter that doesn't exist or hasn't been calibrated and that they don't know how to use, right? They just come out and they need a tape measure and they need a watch.
And to be, so are you saying this is a common sense
Yeah, I mean,
time restriction?
communities adopt, time of day and day of, this is, we do this all the time with noise limits, and, you're not going to have a scientific justification for, noon to 5, right? It's just like, no, this is not a science issue. This is a fairness issue. This is like, you want to be able to use your deck at some point during the day without interference from the court. And so, to me, this is a fairness and justice issue, not a scientific health issue, right? It's like, yeah, you get your time, we get our time. And, communities are going to, have different times. I actually did a study of the times communities use for day and night, even, and it's got some pretty standard levels, but it's got some variation in it too, and you're just going to find that some communities are going to start at 7, some at 8. Some that are going to be less restrictive are going to start at 6, and some are going to start at 9, and and the other thing is, I mean, I really believe in the Sabbath, that we should have a day of rest, whether it's Saturday or Sunday, I don't care, but it should be one of those days. That there was a reason this is one of the 10 commandments, and, we ought to honor it, and that having a noise Sabbath is really important.
So I want to wrap this up and maybe have Rob give any concluding thoughts or thank yous to Les and the work you've done on this.
Yeah, thank you, Les, and thank you, Nalini, for really pushing this through. Both of you guys, it's a great starting point, and as we've said, it's not perfect. I don't think it satisfies a lot of people on both sides, and that's a good solution, right? I think what I love about this is that it points to a distance of about 250 feet that where all the the attempts to mitigate the noise really begins. I'd love to see a no-fly zone, 0 to 250, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that would be, but we're not there yet, I guess. And, but so we're going to keep on plodding through, right?
But the other thing is, you should never say that. Even though I agree, because once you say, well, the no-fly zone is 250, then people go, okay, we'll do 300. And so you'll notice that I didn't put it in there, and I would never put it in there, because I mean, absolutely, if you tell me that you're planning one within 250, I'm saying you're crazy, because you're just going to create this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
You're going to create problems.
But do I want to go out there and say, no, that's my no-fly zone? No, because you're going to have problems at 300 and 350 and 400 too.
No, and I appreciate this approach, is that it's a little bit open-ended. It's not, it's kind of hard to argue with it, but you can explain it, as you very well put, that you got to find the people that believe in your cause, that are in leadership positions, and you got to lobby them, you got to educate them. Educate before you litigate. I mean, this is what I'm telling people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Les.
We're going to close out the recording right now. Thank you again to our members for funding this project, and I really appreciate everybody here today asking their questions and listening to the presentation. Thank you so much.